Hey, welcome to our second Demystifying the Process webinar. We are Women's Foundation of Oregon. My name is Libra Ford, and I am the Executive Director here. This is an important webinar for which is a follow-up from our first one. And our first one can be found on our YouTube channel if you are interested in watching that. We'd love for you to go watch that, actually. This specific webinar is all about demystifying the process. Our purpose is to empower Oregonians, in particular women, but all Oregonians, by providing them with tools and knowledge to understand the legislative process and how to use OLIS. And it's very important to us that we give you the basic understandings and a pathway to what legislative process means here in the state, so that you as an Oregonian can feel confident enough to be engaged and also to understand what is happening. So with that being said, welcome. We're excited to have you here. I have introduced myself, but we have two other support folks here, and later on I'll introduce our special guests. So Casey, would you like to introduce yourself, my partner in crime?
Thank you very much, Libra. Yes, I'm happy to be here. My name is Casey Houlihan. I use he, him, his pronouns. In my day job, I am a legislative and government relations coordinator for Oregon Housing and Community Services. I'm here in my personal capacity as a member of the policy committee for the Women's Foundation of Oregon, and I've been working in a variety of positions in the Oregon legislature, in and out of the building, for about the last 15 years, give or take. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Casey. And Casey has been incredible with many other people who are on this call who are also a part of our policy committee. Casey is one of our original members of that committee. So thank you so much, Casey, for that time you spent with us, and of course for co-signing on this webinar. And also, Kristen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Fraley, she, her pronouns, the Director of Operations here at WFO, and really excited to get folks educated on this stuff so that we can make a real difference in our state.
Thank you, Kristen. And she is one of our shadow warriors here at WFO. We also have Stephanie Marquez on the call and Ruthie Crawford. And we also have a couple board members here. So I just want to acknowledge their presence. And we will have our special guest introduce, who is Representative Mark Gamba. Yay! Thank you for being here, Mark. I'll introduce you later. I have a whole bunch of fireworks for you. So the first thing we're going to talk about is introducing you to the Oregon Legislative Information System, which is so nicely known as OLIS. And last time we dabbled into this a little bit, but today we're going to go a little bit deeper. I'm going to pass this over to Casey, who is going to help us begin the introduction of OLIS.
Thank you, Libra. So I wanted to start with OLIS. I know we talked about this a little bit during the part one, but I want to come at this fresh for anyone who missed that as well. As Libra mentioned, it's the Oregon Legislative Information System online. Usually you can find it by going to olis.state.or.us. However, that link does not seem to be working today. I assure you, if you Google OLIS, it will be the first link that comes up. That is typically what I still do to access it. And we are very fortunate here in Oregon to have such an incredible resource that's available to us to really have a real-time insight into what's happening in the policymaking space. This is a tool that legislators and their staff will also use behind the scenes to make sure that everything is lined up for any particular pieces of legislation that might be being discussed. We are very fortunate to be able to get a look under the hood ourselves while that's happening and see all of the notes that legislators or staff add, as well as any materials that folks include for any particular bill. So I want to walk us through a little bit about how to use this. Please do feel free to add questions to the chat, and I will try to incorporate those into my presentation while we go. But just kind of starting off about what you can use this for. This is a great way to monitor any activity on any bill or legislation or legislators, either remotely or in the building. This is updated usually either in real time or within 24 hours of any particular action, and you can usually use this to see any scheduled actions that might be coming up for any particular pieces of legislation in the future either. Thank you for sending that link into the chat, Kristen. Appreciate that. So as you can see right now, this is the homepage for OLIS. When you pull it up right now, at the top, it shows you what session you're looking at. These are important things to pay attention to as you begin to dive in to explore, because not having the settings just right will result in not getting the results or information or answers that you might be looking for. So you want to make sure that wherever you're situated in here, you're looking at the correct session. Right now, the legislature is not in session. So what we're seeing is the 23-24 interim, where they do pass some pieces of legislation during legislative days here and there, or any other emergency sessions that might come up. You can also adjust what session you're looking at right up here with the session button to go through and look. You can see we can look through the first special session, which was just a few weeks ago in December, or the full 2024 short session, which was the beginning of last year. To the question in the chat, yes, I believe we are recording this, and this should be made available later. So anybody is welcome to walk through. If we were to look just, for instance, at the 2024 regular session, which was a short session, that will give us the full list of everything that had happened here. Now, obviously, there are not going to be any readings or anything currently scheduled for the last session, and that's equally true for the interim here as well. But if we were to go through bills, this is where we can really start unlocking some of the search features of OLIS, which is extraordinarily comprehensive. You can either search for any piece of legislation by the bill number, or you can search for anything from within the text of the bill. This can be a pretty broad search function, though, as bills are pretty big. You can also narrow it down just to things that are in the catch line or the summary of the bill, or just the LC number, if that's something that you're looking for as well, or even the full text. But since many of these bills can be dozens and dozens of pages long, this will often be a more fruitful search than is helpful. And then one of the other things that folks will really commonly do is look by bill sponsor, which, as you can see, lets you either search by a legislator's name or search by a committee name. And it also allows you to see a full list of the members of each chamber. Just to kind of go over some of the Civics 101 for folks, there is both a House and a Senate here in Oregon, and we do have folks in both. There are exactly 2 representatives for every 1 senator and 2 House districts for every 1 Senate district, and they're paired up accordingly. So this gives you some insight into exactly what we're looking at, and we can pull up any legislator here in particular. I'll pick up House Majority Leader Bowman, for example, and you can see any bills that they might have been the chief sponsor of, or you can see any particular pieces that they just happen to sign on to as a co-sponsor. So I'm going to pick one of these randomly just so we can also see what a page for a particular bill looks like. And so this, as you can see, is the page for any particular bill. And we'll see these appear in OLIS for the 2025 regular session in the coming weeks, because they're set to start in just under 2 weeks. So we should start seeing the latest batch of LCs migrating into here pretty soon. For any particular bill, this is where you can see anything that has been happening to it, anything that will be happening with it. We don't have any current examples to point to again because we're in an interim. But if you were to go down here to the bottom of the page, in addition to all of this main information, like the extent to which there might be a fiscal impact, the extent to which there might be a revenue impact, and then also obviously any of the accompanying documents like a staff measure summary, which is a great tool that the staff put together to provide a brief overview of that legislation for the members of the committee. Further, you can also go down here to see any action that was taken on a particular bill. This one looks like it didn't get particularly far, but as you can see, it was referred to the speaker's desk, sent over to the Judiciary Committee, and then appeared to have died there. You won't see anything here now, but if this were a current bill, you would also see any upcoming meetings. So if a bill were scheduled to have, for instance, a vote on the floor, this is where that would appear. So I just want to make sure that everyone can kind of see everything that's accompanying this. I'm also going to pull up a bill so we can kind of see some more fruitful examples here. Everybody can still see the tab I switched over to, yeah? Great. This was a bill that I had a chance to work on a couple of years ago. This was Senate Bill 1579. This was an equity-based bill that was designed to redirect some tax revenue towards communities that had been most disproportionately harmed by other policies historically. And we actually ended up getting this passed after running it a few times, but we got it passed in 2022. This gives us, as you can see, a much more robust history of what exactly happened to this bill. And this is where you can really do like a full forensics of everything that might have happened with any particular piece of legislation. So you can see its full journey from where it's first assigned in committees. You can also see any information on any public hearings or work sessions that might have been held on that bill. And in fact, if you see a plus here, that means you can also see what the vote was for that particular bill. So you can see exactly where legislators landed on any particular piece of legislation. This can be extremely important when doing research to see where folks have voted historically and how that might impact their decisions moving forward. You can also see here when it's sent to a primary chamber like the House or the Senate and what those results were too. And you can see the full chamber vote here to see where everyone landed. It will also show, as you're going through the process, many of the events under the scheduled events tab, because if anything is still in the future, then that will appear accordingly. So hopefully this gives folks some insight into how to navigate OLIS. I want to also go in a little bit deeper. We're talking about specific bills. We also talked a little bit about how to look it up based on specific legislators. I want to also talk about the committee structure. So virtually most of the work that happens in the legislature happens within the committees. A bill is assigned to a particular committee. The committee will hold usually a hearing, a public hearing, and then also subsequently usually a work session. Sometimes those things happen at the same time. Often they are separate. It will list them either as singularly or separately, depending on what's happening on any particular day. But if you were to pull up a particular committee, for instance, this bill happened to go through the Senate Committee on Labor and Business, this will also show you all of the information on that particular committee. The folks that sit on that committee, you can click their individual links for information on how to contact those people. And then over on the right, you can also see, and this is really key here, a history and very detailed summary of every meeting that they've held. And if you click on those right here, it will list what particular pieces of legislation had been worked on in any particular meeting. But let's just for the sake of argument, go to their last meeting here. This will also show you the agenda for that meeting, as well as any of the meeting materials here. You can see if you're on a page for any particular day that a work session or any committee meeting was held, rather, you will see this exact page, and it will show you both the agenda for those meetings, any other revisions of those as well. Same thing for any meeting materials that might have been included as ahead of that meeting, which could have also involved amendments for any particular bills that we're working on, pieces of testimony that folks might have included for any particular bill. And then also a recording log so folks can actually see who was saying what during the actual meeting. And this is incredibly detailed, as you can see. This information right here about who was speaking at what time pairs up very nicely with this little play button that you will see next to almost all of the committee meetings that have been held. And I'm not going to play the whole video, but I'm just going to show this as an example. We have incredibly thorough record keeping here in the state of Oregon for how we retain videos on this. And you can go back several years in OLIS and watch videos on committee hearings. And I'm just fast forwarding this to demonstrate the point. A lot of these were likely virtual meetings too, as you can see, but they do have a camera in the committee hearing rooms. They do record the virtual ones as well. So this allows you to really go back in time and see exactly what's happened, exactly what folks have said on the record, who has taken what side on particular bills in the past, and really anything else that might be included on there. So I hope that that provides some insight into what this can do. I am happy to take any questions from folks too, but the only other thing I would point out is if you're looking for particular bills and anything else that might be associated with them, like we're on the page for this bill right now, this, if you click on it, will show you the full measure text of the bill. So anytime they draft any language that could go into the bill, we can see that, usually as soon as they upload it into OLIS. This happens virtually instantaneously. Sometimes there might be a delay of up to a day, but it's very rare that it takes them longer than that. And especially if there are committee deadlines related to any of the work that they're doing for any of these bills, they usually are required to get it in by the time that the hearing is held or within 24 hours thereafter. Individuals outside of the building are also strongly encouraged to make sure that they send an electronic copy of their testimony within 24 hours of the committee hearing happening to make sure that they can become included in the proper public record. So I just wanted to give people a little bit of a ride through there. You can see that's how you see the full measure text. You can also see here any distinctions between an introduced piece of legislation or I'll use a different bill as an example. Oh, pardon me, the screen share is getting in the way. There we go. So if I go back just a couple of pages here until I'm at a specific bill, and if there's anything in here that folks are seeing that they would like me to tool around in, please do feel free to let me know. But as you know, the policymaking process is often an iterative process. And so the way that a bill is originally drafted is not necessarily indicative of how that bill lands. So here, when we look at text, you can see not only what was introduced, but you can also see any versions that include any amendments that were introduced as well. You can also see an engrossed version, which is usually a final version that takes into account all of the adopted amendments that have been proposed for a particular piece of legislation, but before the bill has been passed. And then there's an enrolled version. This is final. That means that that bill has been passed into law and enrolled into statute and now exists as a part of ORS. So we can see all of those versions here. You can also compare them side by side to see what differences there might have been. You can see what substantive changes there might have been to any of the language therein. You can also see those amendments individually listed off here as well. Usually they give each amendment as a name, a dash and a number. So that is to say there's a -1, a -4, a -5, and so on. And it's not uncommon for some more controversial pieces of legislation to see up to -20, -30, -50. And those can become very messy and complicated. And so it is very helpful that we have such a cohesive system here to be able to monitor that as it goes. To the question in the chat, some other states do have systems like this. Few are as user-friendly as we have here in Oregon. There is, to a lesser extent, a federal counterpart to this for pieces of legislation in the US Congress, it is not as robust, it is not updated as regularly, and it's not as accessible for folks either. And when it comes to the interactive component of it, I don't think that there's anything that really holds a candle to how in-depth OLIS is. This is something that allows us to not only observe and track and report any of these changes that are going on or any active policy-making discussions that are happening, but it allows us to participate. So this is something where if we know that there is a hearing that's coming up and we see that it's scheduled for a particular bill that we're concerned about, and I'll go back to the main page for this bill too, so we can see, but you can sign up to receive updates on any particular bill as it's going through the process, and that'll send you an email whenever something gets scheduled for a bill. And then you can also register to testify if you see that something's coming up in a public hearing that you'd like to speak to. The legislature is generally very accommodating these days of folks who are not able to physically make it into the Capitol, and they can arrange to have virtual testimony when circumstances allow for it. Or because one does not preclude the other on here, you can also submit a written piece of testimony. And nowadays you are able to do that right through OLIS. You can also reach out to legislative offices directly to make sure that they've got it in their inbox. And I would strongly encourage people to do both because we want to make sure that anything that we have to say does in fact get in front of their radar. But this does allow us to really participate meaningfully in a way that others will see publicly, because that testimony will appear in the testimony here once it's submitted into OLIS and uploaded. So I see another question here about, can we see the voting record of a particular senator or representative? Well, let's see. And if we wanted to go to the OLIS homepage, we could pull it up by representative here in the search page. So we would just kind of search for bills, and we could search by bill sponsor. If only we had somebody that we could pick as a random representative sample of who that might be. And there we go. And of course, this is none because we're in the current thing, but let me just pull it up by legislator instead. So if we were to go by, let's see, I would have to find the legislator's page, but yes, the short answer to that is yes, you are able to go to a particular legislator's page. Here, let's click it this way. So typically you'd have to go through OLIS to be able to do this, but yes, there are ways. You might have to look for each individual piece of legislation to see what. You won't necessarily see a voting record for each person listed in one page because there are so many bills that they're voting on at any given time or within committee. But the short answer is yes, there is a way to go through and be able to see that, if not necessarily presented neatly in one form, but you can go through and determine what the track record for voting is for any particular representative or senator in here. The next question on here I see, is there an ETA for when bills will start appearing in OLIS for the 2025 session? My understanding is that they should be dropping soon. If there is other folks on the call who have more up-to-date information than that, please do let me know. But I think within the next 2 weeks, we should see things begin to fall. And I believe that the upper bound on how long that could take would be the 21st, when the legislature is set to convene again. So that should be when we start seeing this session's bills turn up. But for now, we're still in the interim. If we go to today's date, and that's another thing you can also do, is search by a specific date. This is one other thing I'd like to point out too. So if there is any particular things that you'd like to see, this does allow us to, for instance, go ahead to today, or better still, I'll go to February 1st because that's when we will be in the proper 2025 session. And even then, see, if you select the date, you still have to change the session. So there are some unique peculiarities to using the system. There are some nuances that one needs to master to be able to utilize it fully. But all of the raw materials are here, and they do exist in one place, and they are very keen to make sure that this gets updated in a timely fashion. Do folks have any other questions, or is there anything in particular that folks would like me to dive into a little bit deeper? Okay. Seeing none, the only other thing that I would point out is the opportunity to engage with committees, which I know we talked about just a little bit, but because we are able to look through all of the specific committees here based on their structure, we are able to look at any things that they might have coming up. Again, typically when they have things coming up, and I'm picking this committee because it's one that I work with relatively frequently. But you can see exactly what they have worked on in the past, what's been discussed. I strongly recommend for folks who are looking into past examples of bills that are similar to anything that you might be working on or trying to advocate for, go back and watch a work session or a public hearing on any particular bill that had been worked on in the past, because you will learn quite a bit about who came out in favor of it, what arguments were used against it. and specifically what concerns that legislators might have had, because they use the public hearings as an opportunity to openly discuss what some of those concerns are and ask the advocates what the answers to those questions might be. So it's incredibly helpful, not only for sort of research purposes, but also just for setting a legislative record of what it is, because it's not uncommon after the fact for there to be some disagreement about what a particular piece of legislation might actually mean, or some disagreements over an interpretation over a particular way a statute is written. So this allows us to go back in time and really examine a sort of legislative intent, which is the term that they'll often use to signify what legislators meant to do with a particular piece of legislation that they were moving forward.
Casey, I'm going to jump in really quick because I think we are shifting to the next part. And I want to make sure that we get all the information to you guys before we start diving into all of your questions. Really quickly, I want to, say thank you, thorough as usual, Casey, thank you. And you'll still be here, but I just wanted to say thank you. In addition to everyone listening, this is a language. And like any language, the best way to learn it is to immerse yourself into it and become a part of it naturally. So if you open the system, say 5 minutes a day, and just click things, the language will become more familiar to you. The process will become more familiar to you. It won't feel so overwhelming. There's one question that was asked that I will answer really quickly before we get to testimonials. How do you search for something specific? I highly encourage you to look at the committees. And in our last video, we broke down what committees mean and different houses and all those things. So review that if you need to, as many times as you need to. But sign up for the notifications, because then you'll also start to get that language in your email and you'll start to see the rhythm of topics. And then you can start signing up for specific representatives or senators that you want to make sure you are on top of what's going on. And they have automatic newsletters and updates that will come to you naturally. And so not only can you do it like in a very direct way by going to OLIS, but the passive way to learn the language is to sign up and get that information. Does that make sense to everyone? So I want to move into our testimonies, because I do think that now that you're going to play with this language, it's a two-way street, this language, right? So it's a beautiful thing that we have this great transparent system, but now it's talking at you. How do you talk back? How do you give it information? And that would be giving legislators information, because you too, as an Oregonian, you have expertise. And so the first thing that we want to talk to you about is this is a process, or step-by-step process, that we have a document for. We'll make sure we send this to you, but I'm going to go through this step-by-step process of what we suggest you do to testify on behalf of your position, on behalf of your expertise as an Oregonian. And then I'm going to introduce Mark, because obviously, as one of our representatives of the state, we want to make sure that we hear from him what it means to hear testimony. So first and foremost, I want you to remember, OLIS is the key to getting to the information. OLIS is the key to understanding what the information may be saying. So that's step one. You got to go in there, you got to see it. Step two is you got to have a little bit of grit. And I like acronyms. If you know anything about me, I'm an acronym girl, because acronyms help you remember stuff. And you got to have a little bit of grit. And grit stands for go to the bill that you may be interested in. That's the G. Read the bill. Once you get to that bill, then identify what your position is for that bill. Then once you identify that, tailor a response based on who you are and what you represent in Oregon. So that's step two. You gotta have grit. You gotta know OLIS for step one, and then you gotta have grit for step two. Once you get through step one and two, the next part is kind of fun, because now you've got a little bit of research underneath your belt. You are the expert, so you know what you're talking about. Now, the next thing you want to do is structure your testimony. When you testify verbally, you have a set amount of time. If you've never gone to Toastmasters, you probably want to go to at least one or go read up on them, because your set time is your set time and you are cut off. It is the most devaluing feeling to not get all your words out and you're cut off. Just know, if you practice, you can get it all out, okay? So your structure of your testimony is important to make sure you get your information out. So one, you got to start with a header. What's your name? Do you represent some organization or not? And what location of Oregon are you coming from? Include what committee you may be talking to, and make sure you're talking about what you are very clear about what bill or topic you are discussing when you begin. You don't want to be ambiguous about what you are talking about. Be very clear. The next thing is you want to introduce and state your role, relevant credentials, maybe your experience, and clearly indicate your position for support or opposition or an amendment. Be very clear about that in your introduction, so that those that are listening to you can be activated immediately, because they know where they stand and they're listening, and why you are providing structure, testimony. The next part of your structure should include the body. So key points, keep it to 2 to 3 key points. The mind psychologically cannot understand more than 3. You are talking to humans, not a computer. So if you go into too many points, you're going to lose people. So just stick to 2 to 3 points, and don't resist the urge to have 20 points. Just resist it. Make sure if you have any evidence, even if it's lived experience, express that. That is your data. You don't have to come with data from a real research, but if you have lived experience, express that as your evidence, and then make a connection between your lived experience, your data, and the connection to the bill. That should be the body of your testimony. And then last but not least, you should restate your position, support, oppose, amend. Then you should offer to answer any questions if you still have time. And then, of course, thank the committee for their time and consideration, even if you don't like them. They're still listening to you, and you need to be professional and courteous to open that door of dialogue between the two of you guys. So reviewing your structure, header information, then your introduction, then the body, and then conclusion. And we have this written out for you so you can be very clear and you can repeat it, and we will send it to all of you guys. You can go through it as many times you want. This should be for written and verbal testimonies. This is the structure you should use all the time. Be very concise. Last but not least, if it is written, have someone proofread it for you, because this is a public document. For the rest of this world, as long as we have OLIS, it will be on there. And so if you have a crazy typo and for some reason it comes up again, that will be how you're recognized. With the typo. So have a friend read it. Have a circle of people read it together. Make sure you check in for your typos. Make sure your data is correct. If it's lived experience, that's your experience, it's fine. But if you're using numbers, make sure it's correct. And maybe even put some citations in there so people know where you're coming from. And last but not least, have a friend or mentor maybe review it with you outside of the grammatical stuff, so that, you want to come across the way that you intend to, and not come across in a way that maybe deflects from your testimony and the things you're really trying to say. And then, of course, you want to submit this. If it's written, you want to submit it. If it's in person, then you'll have to sign up. And we will go through some of those details later. And then you should follow up. If you testify verbally, if you testify written wise, and there were people there, you should write the names down while you're there, and you should send them a message and follow up. If you care about a subject enough, you should follow up. And the work of being a public servant is to answer you, and they will. Now, it may be their staff, but they will answer you. If you took your time to testify, they will answer you. So make sure you follow up so there's no gaps in your understanding of what's next and what could be happening. So with that being said, I'm going to take a small breath, and I'm going to say, I want to introduce, I don't think we have any, did I have any questions during that segment? Oh, you answered them. Yes. Thank you for answering those questions. I will say this. I want to introduce Mark because one of the things we're going to go through a specific policy that we are following right now, but Representative Mark Gamba is a very special human to me personally, but to the state. We are super privileged to have such a human in the position that he sits in, and just an incredible being. I don't even know. I'm looking for your bio. Hold on one second. I had it up. Give me a second. There we go. I'm going to read his bio just so you guys know. Uh, Representative Mark Gamba, Democrat from District 41, Milwaukee. During his career as an editorial photographer, Mark was sent around the world to capture images of exciting adventures and beautiful locations. Decades ago, he was seeing undeniable signs of increasing drought, bleaching coral reefs, melting glaciers, significant weather disturbance, and other indicators of climate change across the globe, in spite of a very clear warning from the scientific community. He saw governments and businesses doing virtually nothing to address the impending threat. Climate change was the core reason Mark ran for Milwaukee City Council and it remains his top motivator to this day. During his 8 years as mayor of the city of Milwaukee, he championed causes ranging from urban tree canopy protections to advancing racial justice in city bureaucracy and to building out bike and pedestrian infrastructures and more. Mark is one of the few renters currently serving in Oregon State Legislature, and he is of modest means. These perceptives inform his policy position, and he strives to keep poor and working class centered in his lawmaking at all times. And I will say personally, the work that Mark has done, I still get to enjoy in Milwaukee. Thank you for your service there, and thank you for continuing to be here, and thank you for being here. We'd love to hear from you in any expertise that you have. Thanks, Mark.
Well, thank you. That was an amazing introduction. I hope someday I can live up to it. One quick little note on OLIS that I think is super important, and it took me a while to learn this myself, is that very often the bill as it was originally dropped may have almost nothing to do with what the bill is. So always look at the amendments and determine, because there are literally bills out there that it's 2 sentences and it really does nothing, and then the bill came later as an amendment. So the amendments are in many ways more important than the original bill. Obviously, once it's passed, it's engrossed, it's all included. But as it's in process, the amendments are super important. Okay. With that said, thinking about how to be the most effective you can possibly be when you are testifying, either in written or in person, and I would strongly recommend both. If you can do it written, even if you write out what you're going to say and you submit what you wrote out in written, that's important to have it on the record, because a lot of times legislators will be thinking about that bill and they'll go through the testimony. They won't sit down and watch the entire hearing, because that would mean they'd have to sit for an hour and a half to, watch somebody's 2-minute testimony, right? So they will go back and they'll look through written testimony. So absolutely do both. And the reason to do the spoken testimony is for the committee itself. That is often more effective. Even if you wrote the exact same thing, having a human face to it and having that emotional interaction is critical. Keep in mind, virtually none of the legislature are experts in the thing that they are sitting on a committee doing, right? So I'm a good example, right? I'm a photographer. That is my expertise. That's what my college degree is in. That's what my professional career was. I'm not passing bills about photography. I've never even seen a bill that addresses photography in any way, shape, or form. I am working on bills around climate. I'm working on bills around housing. I'm working on bills around homelessness. I'm working on bills around development and all kinds of things. And so I learn as much as I can, but I am still not an expert. That is not my background. So when you are speaking to a committee, you need to speak to them like they're a human being, just another human being, like your neighbor. Explain to them like you would explain to your neighbor what it is you're trying to get across, literally at that level. Particularly in written testimony, include data, include facts, but in many cases, your story, putting an actual human experience of why this bill will make a difference in your life or what the current situation is doing to you in real terms, and be as vulnerable as possible in many instances, because very often we're talking about things that are painful and really destructive to people's lives. And the more the legislators that you're talking to can understand how painful and how destructive, the more effect it will have on them. So really focus on that part, and then use little bits of data to support your argument. And again, if you only have 2 minutes of spoken testimony, do the story, do the personal part, and then put the data in the written testimony. Human beings, legislators or not, make decisions emotionally. Most people make decisions based on emotion rather than on logic. That is just reality. So if you make a purely logical argument, you're likely not to be moving somebody very far. It's good to have that logical argument so that when there's pushback, you can point to things to support what you're saying. But emotion is critical. To the degree that you can, learn about the legislators you're speaking to, particularly the chair, but learn about the other legislators, learn about the ones that are going to be opposed to what you're trying to do and the ones that are going to be supportive, so that you have a sense of how to get the message across, right? You can say the same thing often in 2 different ways. And in one way, somebody might be able to hear it. In another way, they just shut down automatically. And it's important, if you can, to try and have that awareness as you're speaking. Sometimes you do want to be fully confrontational. And that's not a bad thing, right? We do need people to show the extent of the anger or the pain or whatever, as long as there's enough other people that are speaking to it in a way that those legislators can hear. Have kind of 2 versions prepared, at least in your mind, because in some hearings, you'll walk in thinking you're going to get 3 minutes, and it'll turn out that 300 people have signed up to testify, and the chair will say, okay, we're giving everybody 1 minute, which is a joke, right? You can't hardly order lunch in 1 minute, let alone get across a complex and emotional message on an important bill. But to the degree that you can, have a really importantly core message like highlighted on your paper or whatever way helps you. So if you're told you only get 1 minute, you can go to the core key message in that 1 minute. I've watched a lot of people come up to testify, and they start out with their usual thing that they would have said in a 3 minute, and by the time they get to the core, their time is up. So they got no message across whatsoever. So be really cognizant of the time frame, and they will cut you off. You don't get to go super longer. Maybe finish. They might let you finish your sentence. And then the other piece to advocacy is to ask for meetings with your legislator, that's important. But even more important in some ways is to meet with people who you perceive to be on the fence who are on that committee. Those are the critical people that you have, ask for the longer conversation. And if you're representing some group, you're pretty likely to get that meeting, at least with their staff. I try and meet with everybody. I have an insane schedule because I want to hear what people have to say. And very often in those conversations, that's an opportunity for a little bit of back and forth. And sometimes that can inform both of us. You don't get that in a committee meeting. There is almost no situation where there's any kind of back and forth. The likelihood of you getting to answer questions is slim, unless you had 3 minutes and you did it in 2 and something you said really sparked an interest. Generally speaking, you will not get a chance to answer questions. So try and get your message across very concisely and very perfectly in the allotted time. But if you ask for a meeting with a specific legislator in their office, that's when you can get a little bit of back and forth, and you can ask them questions, and you can then respond to their answer to that. It will inform you kind of where they're coming from. And that's key. You need to the best degree possible, and I know this is hard because I can't even do it in a lot of cases, and I'm in the legislature trying to figure out who is the vote hanging on, right? And you may never learn that unless you get it sorted out before the work session comes. A work session means we're going to vote on the bill. It's backwards from the way city councils call things. The work session in the legislature is the moment when we're going to vote on that bill. They will not even call for a work session unless they know they have enough votes to pass it. It is really rare for a bill to die in a vote in committee, and even more rare for it to happen on the floor. Almost always the chair knows that they have enough votes to pass that bill. So you need to sort out who the people are that are on the fence, and very often you can get that if you watch the entire testimony and you just watch people's facial expressions and their visual cues. They're nodding, or they're smiling, or they're shaking their head, or they're scowling, or whatever. You can get a sense of where they are. And if the thing you're working on is a thing that you would imagine, say, a Democrat would agree with, and you're getting those cues from one of the Democrats, that's somebody you need to go focus on and help them understand why this bill is important and why it needs to be passed.
Mark, you got a question.
Sure.
Speaking of something you just said, can you speak to when to focus on advocacy with members of a committee versus your own representatives or senators? And they said, I know legislators are more interested in hearing from their own constituents, but they might not be on the topic or the bill you want to address.
And that's exactly right. Yes, you are more likely to get a meeting with your legislator than you are with, say, the legislator from across the state. But keep trying and try really hard. And like I said, if you are representing a group or an organization, you'll have a little better shot at it. The problem with going in to meet with your legislator, there's a couple of them. One, given that you are probably in the majority, and as far as the way you feel about things, and your legislator is probably in the same vein as you are very likely to go in speaking to the choir, right? Preaching to the choir. So it's great to meet with your legislator, and they can maybe give you some tips or some clues, or maybe they can then go talk to a particular other member who you can't get a meeting with about that thing if you really get them fired up. But we are insanely busy. We each have at least 3 committees that we're serving on. Each committee is likely to have 100 to 200 bills assigned to it, the amount of sheer lack of time to be engaged in all the different topic areas, it's just impossible. We literally have to trust other members of our caucus who are in the committee that's working on that thing to tell us, okay, what's the story with this bill? Because let's say you come to me and you want to talk about healthcare. Great, I care very much about that. I am a proponent for universal healthcare. I will fight to make that happen. I do not serve on a healthcare committee. So the first time I will have a vote on a healthcare bill is on the floor of the House. So that means it's passed through committee and either gone to the Senate and passed through that committee, or it's gone to the Ways and Means and it's been established that there's enough money for that, whatever cost of that bill, and then it comes back to the floor. That's when I will get to vote on it. So coming to me on a bill that none of my committees see is of limited value. There was a second part to that question about meeting with the people. I suppose I could just pull up chat, huh?
Oh no, it says so meeting with members of a committee or your representative for your.
Yeah, so the members are really the members of the committee are really the ones that you need to really connect with. Unless, so here is one situation where it might matter that you meet with your legislator. If it is passed through that committee, maybe it passed on a bipartisan way. Maybe there were Republicans that voted for it, and it got through Ways and Means or it got through the Senate. It could still die. So if the caucus doesn't perceive that there's enough votes to pass that bill, it won't even get a shot on the floor. I personally don't like that. They do it to protect swing votes. They do it to protect or swing districts. They do it for a number of reasons. I don't like it. I personally want people to have to take those hard votes on the floor and vote against something, because very often important bills die in a very sneaky way. And then that legislator who was maybe it was going to pass or not pass based on that legislator's opinion can go out and, let's say it was a climate bill, right? And they voted against it because they have a gas station. I'm just making stuff up. Or they were going to vote against it. So it never goes to the floor. And then they go out and they campaign. They talk about what a climate champion they are, right? You've got nothing to hold their feet to the fire on. So that's why I'm very frustrated by the system, but it is the system. So the only instance where it's going to matter is if a bill is very controversial and it may or may not come to the floor. That's when you want to make sure that your legislator for sure is on, and any ideas that they have on who might not be supporting that bill. And then you want to go talk to those people. I know that was complicated and I probably did a horrible job.
No, you did a great job. You did a great job, Representative Gamba. You did a great job, as you continue to do a great job. And I have one question for you before we bring this to a close. Is there any bill in particular right now that you want us to know about that you would like to have some support on?
I have two bills that are going to be exceedingly controversial and both exceedingly important. One is my minimum wage bill. So right now, 2,000 working families are being evicted from their homes every month in the state of Oregon for inability to pay, i.e. rents have gone up faster than their pay has gone up. 2,000 a month. We have this homeless crisis, and everyone's working their asses off to build more affordable housing, to get more people off the street. But if we're adding 2,000 families every single month to the street, we are not going to solve that problem. So what my bill does is it ties the minimum wage to the cost of the average one-bedroom apartment in a given region. So there will be different regions around the state, and each region's minimum wage would be based on being 3 times what the average one-bedroom apartment rents for. So just to make it easy, let's say the average one-bedroom apartment in the Portland metro region was $1,000 a month. That would mean the minimum wage would have to equate to $3,000 a month, whatever that hourly is. That way, if that passes, and it takes a while to come into play, it increases by $2 an hour a year until it's at parity with housing. But once it's at parity with housing, it would mean that if you're working a full-time job anywhere doing anything, you will be able to afford a place to live. That is not true today, not even close, and for about half the population. The second thing that I believe it will do is it will cause the people with money to start building more housing, because it's going to be in their best interest. Now, for a change, we got the rich fighting the rich instead of the rich screwing the poor, which is what typically is the way the system works. So that's a super important bill. Obviously, it's going to be very controversial. Obviously, the knee-jerk reaction from businesses is going to be to absolutely hate it. But if we don't do something like that, we are not going to solve our houseless crisis. The second very controversial bill is the kicker. So in the state of Oregon, well, let me start further back. We have the most broken revenue system of any state in this country. Full stop. Most states have a 3-legged stool. They have a property tax, they have income tax, and they have sales tax. In our infinite wisdom, we chose not to have a sales tax. So now we have a 2-legged stool. Then back in 1992, voters passed 2 measures. It was over a period of a couple of years, but right around 92, 2 measures, Measure 5 and Measure 50. That artificially limited how much property tax could go up each year. If you track that over the 30 years that it's been, is it 30 years now? Jesus. Anyway, many years, 20 some odd years, the cost of doing everything, the cost of running schools, which come from property tax, the cost of running cities, the cost of running counties, you know, all of that's gone up much faster than 3% a year. So all of those entities, cities, counties, special districts, fire districts, parks districts, all those things are dependent on property tax. They are all circling the drain financially to some degree or another. And then, because all of that wasn't screwed up enough, we passed the kicker. And what the kicker does is it says that 2 years in advance, the state economist has to guess what our state income is going to be 2 years hence. And if they are off by more than 2%, everything above that kicks back to taxpayers. So the message that the Republicans use on this is that that is money we didn't need, right? That is money that is outside of our budget needs. That is not even remotely true. It is just what an economist guessed would be our income 2 years ago. And they are almost always inaccurate, and they are almost always inaccurate on the downside. So it almost always kicks. Last year, last long session, the kicker was $5.2 billion, I think. $5.2 billion. We gave that back, and most of that goes back to the richest Oregonians. The vast majority of that goes back to the richest Oregonians. So we are struggling on so many levels. Every time you see a stat that says Oregon is at the bottom for mental health care, Oregon is at the bottom for education, Oregon is at the bottom for all these things, every single one of those things can be traced back to lack of revenue. Every single one of them. Until we fix our revenue system, we are not fixing those things. Full stop. We can band-aid, we can do enough to kind of keep the wheels on, but we are not going to fix any of that stuff until we fix the revenue system. 5 and 50 is really hard. It's going to have to go back to a vote of the people. The kicker, I have a bill that I believe will basically gut the kicker, and we're bringing it this session. we will need support on that because, unsurprisingly, the richest Oregonians will fight tooth and nail to keep that bill, to keep the kicker in place. And a lot of people like getting the $800 back in their taxes that they got, or $700 back. And then they'll turn around and complain about the problems at their schools, or they can't get mental health care, or they can't get all these things, or the homeless people on the street, all the things that we need revenue for, they'll complain about, but they like getting that $800. So it is going to be a big,
For
hard
your
bill.
time today. I want to honor this hour with you, but I also want to remind you two things. We will send you the documents that will show you how to testify the steps. We also, this is recorded. We will share that with you, so please share it out. And everything that you learned today, I'm requesting that you go tell 3 people. That's my request, my ask to you. The more that we share this with our ecosystems, they share with more ecosystems, the more we as Oregonians can take control of our experiences and have an environment that we all can be proud of. So with that being said, it is 1 o'clock. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. And let's go out there and make sure that our voices are heard. Bye, everyone.